high as 40,000. But they've done some severe damage, mainly on young trees. We have some older trees down by the road that are girdled by mice. What I see mostly is mice girdling. I don't see any rabbit girdling, but I do see rabbit damage on the limbs, which you all see as well. What I'd like to do is first of all call Bob Trenton over and him to give a little bit of an explanation of what he sees in his area in southeast Michigan.
All righty. Well, thank you, Phil and Amy, and the opportunity to be here. This year, I don't think we have that number of trees that were damaged, but we have a good number of high-density blocks that have damage. And it seems like those blocks obviously are younger, and those are the ones that the critters, most often rabbits, but some mice have really focused on, and boy, they've really riddled the damage. And they'll usually come in from a fence row or a ditch bank or something, and they'll work their way into the block and then say, boy, this is just like going to the salad bar. Just keep right on going. So it's going to be a tough one to work our way through. I know Phil's going to talk about how to handle these younger 2, 3, 4-year-old plantings and then some older ones, but there's a lot of damage over our way.
Thank you, Bob. I'd like to also thank Dave Chase from Peach Ridge Orchard Supply. Dave, right over here, has bought a whole chest of pop for you guys to have. There's also coffee there, and as the light comes on, you're welcome to help yourself to coffee. Okay, what we're going to do first of all is we have some trees here, but stumps I should say, that we cut off. We're going to do a demonstration or a talk-through demonstration of bridge grafting, and Dr. Ron Perry from Horticulture is going to lead that discussion for the next 15-20 minutes. Then I have Robbie Van Timmeren, who is our expert grafter in this area on everything, top working, bridge grafting, bud grafting, you got it. She can do it better than anybody I ever met, other than maybe Val Pichet, who taught her. By the way, on the video over there is a 1988 video of Val Pichet bridge grafting and top working. And I'll start that up again later. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Ron. He's going to talk about bridge grafting. You can see some of the trunks that we cut off. They're girdled here pretty good by mice, mostly right at the ground level. And as I said, I didn't see very much or any rabbit girdling in this district, but just rabbit feeding on the buds and stems near the ground and on top of the snow. The deer I'm going to take over and talk about bridge grafting.
Sure. Thank you, Phil. This all got started because of one of our growers, actually north of St. John's. You may know Brian Levine. He's with the agriculture operation, where it's a research operation. They had established 2 years ago a young tall spindle planting, probably about 4 acres, I think, in that particular block. And he sent me an image and he says, I don't know what to do. And they were above the guards, and they did a heck of a job girdling 3,000 trees. And that's a lot of trees. You know, you got, and there wasn't anything he could really do about it because he had the guards, but for mice, and not for a snow level that was so high. So, as well, you know, it's going to be up to you. You can either look at the possibility, and so here are the options we're going to be talking about. His option was, do I remove the tree and replace it? Go to the nursery, see if you can find any trees, finished trees. They're not there. Okay. We're all now into, a lot of nurseries are into bud contracts in nurseries, and so an awful lot is not available. Not only for this spring, but also even for next spring. So he's sitting there with a quandary, what next? And so I went over there, we started looking at it, and basically I said, you know, I think what you're thinking about doing, which is what he was thinking about doing, was just to head it right into the tissue above it that was all chewed, and just make a heading cut and use that dead portion as help support until it gets to the bamboo. But he's going to force a new shoot to come up. So he'll be behind by a year and a half or so. It'll be like a Knet boom tree, basically. So I think he's going to be okay. It's just, he's going to be delayed by a year and a half or goes there. But as we started putting all this information together with MSU, with Extension, we started getting a lot of phone calls. Not only about rabbits, but also mice. And so we're seeing a tremendous amount of mouse damage. For example, this is mouse damage here. You can see the union located right here. And then this is all mouse damage here. Okay? And unfortunately, that's not something as easily to solve. There are two ways to go around injury. If I have injury up in here, up where my hand is right now, I can go from where live tissue is and bridge graft it and bring it up and over the damaged area and go back into live tissue again. Now realize that if we have more than 50% damage in circumference around this tree, which this one has more, think of it as if you had a tree that you had a little tractor blight on. What does that tree look like after a few years? Doesn't it struggle with 50% damage where maybe you got a little too close with a disc or a tiller? Yeah. So, you know, these, even if we put a bridge graft on it, that tree will still always be behind. I don't know what your experience is, Robbie, but that's what I've seen, is that even bridge grafting, you're still going to be a little bit behind in that tree, but at least you're going to help that tree out. If you've got chewing all the way around 100%, good luck. I'm not sure that that's going to work. Have you been able to, if you put enough bridge grafts?
If you put enough in,
okay.
And also planting roots.
Well, she's the expert. I do this just kind of, I'm out of my comfort zone here. I teach it in plant propagation. I've taught it for many years. I used to do a lot of bark grafting growing up with my dad teaching me. So my comfort zone is not that great here with this approach, except that we used to do a lot of in-arching. The point I was going to try to make here is if you've got rabbit damage up here, you can use a bridge graft. If that damage is down low here, it is difficult to find good tissue that you can go into down here on the rootstock shank for that lower portion. So you really have only one option. Now she may tell you that she thinks she can probably bridge graft that. I'm not sure. If you go down into this tissue, into the rootstock tissue, do you
I
think
have
you can bridge
grafted
graft it?
on bigger trees, bigger
On
roots.
the bigger,
I've
yeah.
grafted on the roots themselves. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then you're really good, because that's very difficult to do. In that particular case, what we look to, and I don't know if I've got the trees out here, I guess not, they're probably in Phil's car. We use what's called in-arching, where we take a liner, a rootstock liner that you can purchase, plant it near the trunk of the tree, and then come up and go into that bark of that tree and use it just like a bridge graft. And we're going to do that out in the field. Now the question is, where do you get the liners? Well, right now, there's a limited number of liners out there that are available in the nurseries. We've been checking. The one thing I will tell you is, some people would think, well, I've got to have, this is all M9 rootstock, I've got to have M9 rootstock. You don't really have to have M9 rootstock. In fact, even the stronger stocks are better to get your union and net up here. So you can use, in this case, we brought some Bud 118s today. That's about an M7 rootstock. What you're trying to do is provide new vasculature on one side of the bark where it's been damaged, so that you can basically do a bridging. You can come back 3-4 years later, cut that out if you feel like that's too strong a rootstock. And at that particular point, you can make that decision. It's entirely up to you. So that's why it doesn't matter that much exactly what rootstock you're using in that in-arching. You can even use, you may find if you go to a nursery, they got lots of 106, MM106 or M7, you can use that. Knowing that you can still come back and cut that away. So that's a choice you have. All right. So don't be thinking that you've got to have M9 as an in-arching liner. Okay. All right. So if this is a situation, either in-arching or bridge grafting, then you're going to have to make a decision. How are you going to do this? Well, the first thing you have to think about is if it's 1-year-old trees, forget it. That bark is so thin, it's real paper thin. If you try to bridge graft that really paper bark thin, what will happen is it'll strip on you. It's like paper. And so when I say bark slippage, when we pull the bark back, and it'll just strip on you. The only way I've seen that works on 1-year-olds is wedging. And that's where we make a cut, and I'll try to demonstrate that on one of the trees, where we make a wedge cut and then we match the cambiums up. That seems to work okay, all right? And then it doesn't depend on whether the bark is slipping or not. Okay, so, but the most active and most success you're going to have is when the bark is slipping. So that means at least 2-year-olds up to 3-year-olds, then you have a little bit better success. At any point you want to correct me, you go right ahead because you do this for a living, okay? All right, so the most critical part to what you're going to do, if you're going to hire somebody like her to come out and do this, you know, Robbie can do a great job along with Megan, but there's just so few of these skilled professionals out there to do top working. If you find somebody, great. Otherwise, you may have to do some of it yourself. If you do some of it yourself, you really need to practice a couple of sets of skills. And one of those is what's called the slope cut. Okay, and also, by the way, right behind on this table over here, I brought 3 books with me that we use when we teach grafting and plant propagation. Thank you. And here's an older one by Garner on the Grafter's Handbook. These books are available. Also, if you just Google it on bridge grafting and arching, there's a lot of really nice information out there that's available. Those give you kind of some instructions on how to go through the process, all right? So the start of this is making the slope cut on the piece of sign wood that you're going to work with, followed with then inserting into that bark tissue. And that's what we're going to have Robbie demonstrate. But one of the things I want to mention here is that it starts with a really good quality knife. You can't use a jackknife. You can't use just a regular pocket knife. You might get by with a razor knife, but you know that'll dull on you in no time flat. So there's special knives. This is made by Tina that you can purchase. There are a couple of different companies that make these things, and they're left-handed and right-handed. So why is it important to know whether you should get left-handed or right-handed? First of all, the right-handed ones, since they're so common, are the least expensive. Okay, and these I like to use both of them because I'm used to using both of them. But there are some advantages to one way or another, and the reason I'll show you is right now. I'm going to try to put this down. You don't have a lavalier mic, do you?
You want a lavalier?
A lavalier?
Yeah, we have one.
Do?
Yep.
So maybe I don't need a mic. Okay, so I've already written a little article about selecting.
I want that one.
You gotta shut this one off. Okay. I've already written a little article about selecting and then storing sign wood. So one of the things you want to do is you want to collect fairly long pieces like Robbie's done here, and the reason is because if you're bridge grafting, you may have a long area that you have to bridge. So I know when I used to do a lot of top working on trees, I would cut them fairly short so that I could take a lot of pieces with me in the field. But when you're doing bridge grafting, they need to be fairly long. The other thing is, I don't know about you, Robbie, but these ends of this material up in here has a lot less carbohydrate that's been stored in the wood, and you need that for that union to develop. So this is all kind of succulent wood. So what you're looking for is the wood that's in the base of last year's growth, this base area, okay? So the basal 2/3 is the best wood. Once again, you correct me anytime you want.
Well, the cambium surface on the small stuff is real thin too.
It's real thin. So if you're trying to get a large surface area for matching up a cambium, this won't cut it up here. So that's why you'll see I'll usually cut that end off when I go into storage. She left it intact, which is fine because you have less dehydration when you're trying to store it, okay? So the piece of sign wood you want is fairly strong. I've got an old friend that does bridge grafting, and he says, oh, I only use Northern Spy. That's all he uses. Because Northern Spy is really strong. It's a lot of water sprout growth. It has some caliper on that shoot for you, and so that when you try to do any bridge grafting or any other type of grafting with it, it basically knits a lot easier because you have the carbohydrate storage in it and a lot more surface area. It's wider. So, what you're looking for is, if anybody later, by the way, wants to get a little bit of instruction on how to make these cuts, there's basically two ways. And you'll see a lot of people who will make a cut where they do this kind of thing. And by the way, I want to show you something that you always have to have around you when you're doing any grafting. You laugh. Every single lab that we teach a course in grafting, right? Every single lab we teach a course in grafting, somebody gets cut. You know, it's just a matter of, I'm glad I was trained as a medic in the Army because it's useful when you teach plant propagation, okay? All right, so you notice I cut like that. Well, there are people who use that technique and they're really good at it. My dad was really good at that. I mean, he would just make one cut like that and it was done. And it was a beautiful slope cut for 1.5 inches, 2-inch long slope cut. And then he'd come on the back side and you notice he would go like that, right? You notice what I started to do? I started to go like this. That's because that's how I learned to do it. And I found that when I'm teaching people who've never done this before or have very little practice and skill, I found that if I can take this and hold this knife and put my thumb up against the other thumb, hold it into my body, then when I make a cut, I can watch it, and there's less chance of me cutting myself. And it's going to be straight. Okay, so that's what's really key. If I have any waves in this slope cut, your success rate will go down by about 80 or 90%. So that's the key to this grafting business is this has to be a really flat slope cut. Any waves of any kind, and you can't come back and whittle. Don't do that. Okay? Don't think, oh, I got to dip and I got to come back again. And by the way, you make it worse. So that's one cut, and then you pull through, and if you like it, great. If not, don't try to do it again. Just come back up another area, up higher, and make that cut again. So the slope cut is really the most important part. When we're doing bark grafting, what we would do is we would make that slope cut like this on this piece of sign wood, okay? And then I'll just insert this into, say, a bark graft. It goes into a bark graft. It would be something like this, okay? And we would either nail it in place or tape it in place, and it would go on just like that. Okay, so that's a bark graft. What we're doing is we're basically making another cut at the top of this so that we can go around the damage. So when we do that, we're going to take and make another cut exactly the same down below, and we're usually going to measure that up so it's about the same in, about the same aspect or angle. Okay, so that will be two slope cuts.
You might want to tell him why you, when he makes that back cut.
I make a back cut, and that's so that when I start to insert it underneath and into the bark, basically what will happen is it goes underneath the bark real easy, and so that when that bark is slipping, it's just like another knife blade that goes underneath. So what you're doing when you take and open this bark up, okay, what you're doing is you're opening to the cambium. So the best grafters are really quick because when they open that up, that whole cambial cell area dries almost instantly. So the faster you can push that sign stick in, the better chances you have of success. Because that's cell area that basically divides, becomes meristematic, it starts your union process. So it has to go pretty quick. If you open that bark back with your knife and then take your kind of time and you push it in, that dries. And then when it dries, you're done. Okay? So there's some tips and keys to getting success when you're doing this grafting business. And I'm not a professional grafter like Robbie here, and she really knows what she's doing. So at a particular point, the only thing I want to do is just remind you how important it is that what we're doing in bark slippage is we have to wait till that bark is really slipping. And right now it's not. We'll go out into the field here in a little bit, and she's going to demonstrate out there, but I know that when she cut into the bark like this, and when we take with our knife and try to lift up on this flap, it should come really easily. I was doing some apples yesterday afternoon where I am in East Lansing, and that bark slipped really easily compared to here. So we're probably a little bit further ahead in East Lansing right now. But I would say in a couple days it'll be slipping pretty good. And so you basically have a window of how long?
For bridge grafting, you can, I've bridge grafted well past 4th of July. If you can keep your sign wood nice, that means keep it dormant, cold, and where it's not going to move or dry out.
Right.
You can well into July.
And then the other thing is to keep the trees in good health, because when you start to stress out, that bark starts then to not slip. It'll stop slipping real readily. So having an irrigation system, if you're getting to a dry spell, is going to be pretty important. If you turn your irrigation system on, to make sure that you're getting continual bark slippage, okay?
And the age of the tree. A younger tree does not have the carbs stored like an older tree would.
Right. So the problem here is that when I lift this flap, if this flap comes up easily, all intact, great. If, however, when I try to do this, it only comes and it still is kind of tacky and wanting to stay connected to the xylem, the wood portion, you're not ready. Okay, so it's got to come pretty easily. And you know what I'm talking about once you've seen it. It'll just pry open real easy. So that's what you're trying to do, okay?
And typically that's around 1/2 inch green when I do top work. But in saying that, this might slip up here. Well, this is still to the ground. Might not slip as quick because it's colder at the ground. And if you go in there and dig away, that will help, the sun will help warm that up.
Is that right?
Yep.
Well, there's the professional right there. Okay, so questions related to what I just explained to you related to the slope cuts, and then making sure the bark is slipping. I will demonstrate out there when we go to the field how you can possibly on young trees like that are 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds actually put an in-arch, meaning putting a liner in the ground, a rootstock in the ground, and then actually making a wedge cut into the trunk. I can show you that technique. It's more difficult, and why is because when you're cutting into wood, you have a simple line of cambial cells you're trying to match up. And it's kind of like if you're driving a car and you need to stay right there, right on that line. And it's the same thing with the cambium. You're going to try to match two cambiums together, and they're very, very narrow. When we bark, the reason for the bark type approach, which is better, is that instead it's the entire cambial area that is matching with the cambium on that bark tissue. So if I cut in this, if I cut this slope that you see right here, right on the outside is kind of a green area that is right there between the xylem wood and the bark. Okay, we call that the cambium. That's your cell division. That's the most critical part to getting this done right. Okay, so you're matching that cambial area right there, that little line, just a really narrow line. You can barely see it with your naked eye. Okay, you're trying to match that up with the cambium that is basically exposed right here. For example, in this slot here that I've exposed. So it's right there, right on the surface, right there. So you have a whole lot of area of cambial contact that you're trying to make up with just two little